Good morning, students. So, in this class, we are going to learn about the impact of Industrial Revolution. So, Industrial Revolution, as we have studied in the previous chapter, in the same chapter, we have studied as a previous topic. So, in this chapter, after learning about Industrial Revolution, let us see what is its impact, how this Industrial Revolution is showing impact. So let us see one by one what are those impacts. The domestic system of production was replaced by the factory system. So what do you mean by here domestic system? Domestic system is traditionally handmade in houses within, like, you can call it like cottage type, within house, a very traditional way of making goods. That is called domestic goods or domestic system of production. So see, if you look at the domestic system of production, generally it will be less production, and mostly the products or the production is done with hands, human labor. Now, this is replaced by factory system. So you know what is factory system? Factory system means where more number of machines are involved. The production which is through factories will be huge. So that is the first change that was observed because of industrial revolution. It means the domestic system has been replaced by factory system. Large machines were set up in big buildings, generally located by the side of a running stream. So what the people did was they set up first these kind of factories in big buildings. Okay, so to run this big So to run this huge factory system of production, they need big buildings, they need large machines, and also a running stream. So running stream in the sense they require some water facilities, and a number of workers could work simultaneously in these factories and produce huge quantities of goods at a time. So see, factory system does not completely mean that completely human labor has been taken away. To operate these machines, even some sort of human labor is required. So here, the first impact is domestic system. That means traditionally hand making goods within a small area that has been replaced by factory system, where factory system includes large machines, big buildings, and a running stream. That means a continuous supply of water is also necessary. So, along with these large machines, big buildings, and running stream of water, even a number of workers are also needed simultaneously. So, while the machines have, so even though they were machines were making the products, even there is necessary of large number of workers to produce huge quantities of goods at a time. So this was the first impact. That means traditionally hand making and less productive kind of system has been shifted to or changed to large factory made big buildings and all such systems. And the effects of inventions brought about in various fields of production brought about revolutionary changes. See, the effects of inventions. So these inventions, like, you take steam engine, you take printing machine, you take many other inventions made by the scientists of those days, Renaissance days. What happened? These inventions, they brought various changes in the fields of production. So these machines helped them to produce more, to produce products in a large quantity. Hence, that kind of changes are referred as revolutionary changes. So you take power looms, which are used to make clothes. Earlier, handmade hand looms. What happens? They used to give very less number of products. A less number of clothes can be woven. But machines, they could revolutionary. That means in a very drastic manner, in a very huge manner, change can happen in that particular industry. So these changes are referred as revolutionary changes. What was this? I mean, what were the how these revolutionary changes came? Because of the effect of inventions. Scientific inventions and discoveries made revolutionary changes in which area? In the area of production. You take railway locomotives, steamships, telegraph, telephone, motor cars, and many other things made life more comfortable. So, see, these are all few examples for the inventions like railways, steamships, telegraph for communication, telephone for communication, motor cars better than the steam cars, and these all things made life more better. And electricity also came to be used for lighting, heating, cooking, operating radio, television, washing, ironing clothes, and many other chores. See, what not? The impact of Industrial Revolution was responsible for many inventions, and these inventions, like telephone, railways, steamships, like electricity, they made life more comfortable than their previous days. Earlier, the life was little bit difficult with the traditional way of lifestyle. Now, with these modern inventions, which is possible or which was possible because of Industrial Revolution, it could make the life more comfortable. So you take electricity made for lighting, heating, okay, operating radio, television. These all became very, very easy with the invention of electricity. So which it added comfort to the lives of people. So those are the two impacts of industrial revolution. The other two impacts are industrial revolution led to the establishment of many towns and cities. People from rural areas, they migrated to urban areas for employment, education, cultural benefits, and enjoyment. See, what happened was, as industrial revolution progressed, and these industries were generally set up in, outskirts areas of certain areas, places, and those areas have turned into towns and cities because when a factory is set up in a particular area, around that factory, people from rural areas came and they started settling down there because they have a continuous work with a regular payment of salaries and other things. So people from rural areas, they could easily settle in and around that factory areas, and those factories which were seeing the migration of people from rural areas, they slowly turned into towns, and these towns slowly evolved into cities. So, the other major impact was formation of towns and cities because of these industrial areas. And it also led for these urban areas. See, when towns and cities form, what happens? The needs of towns and cities increase. When the needs of towns and cities increase, more employments get created. Education wise, people got more scope for many educational institutions. Cultural benefits, that means people from different areas came and settled together and they started exchanging their culture, and enjoyment, which is nothing but recreation. You find more kind of cities and towns having more kind of recreational facilities. So as they work more in towns and urban areas and they find less time for recreation and all, this recreational facilities also will develop more around these towns and cities. So major impact, you can call it as formation of towns and cities, is another major impact of industrial revolution, which in turn created employment in that areas. And industrial revolution increased the national wealth and made the western nations rich and powerful. So when industries got set up more and more, then what happened? The people dependent on industries also increased. So a new group of people started evolving from these industrial areas, and their incomes raised. When the people's incomes raised, definitely they contribute a lot to the taxation of the governments, and the governments became more wealthy, which is the nation has become more wealthy, that you can say like that, and made the Western nations rich and powerful. So when more and more people got employment through these industries and factories, they had a better wages and incomes, and when their standard of incomes rise, definitely their standard of living rise, and when their incomes rise, they contributed more to the taxation of the nation, and the nation became very soon, the countries became very soon very rich and powerful. So this is another impact of industrial revolution, that is making the nation's wealth more. So till now we have studied about the impacts of or the positive impacts of industrial revolution. Let us see, the industrial revolution also had some negative effects. Okay, not only in positive way, like increasing the production, more people getting employment, also these people having a good wealth, nations becoming rich. These are all certain positive effects. There are also some negative effects of this industrial revolution. The industrial revolution gave rise to capitalism. So a new system of business model has emerged, which is called capitalism. So here what happened? A few individuals in society became capitalists, the owners of the key means of production. So, and they cornered fabulous wealth and wielded immense power and prestige. So let me explain this. See what happened because of industrial revolution. What happened? Certain group of people, they started becoming more and more wealthy because they are the people who set up factories. By earning some money, profit, huge profits from these factories, what they'll do, they'll set up some more factories, right? Now, these factories are the centers of production. That means they produce something. Now, these few people, they started controlling the production. The entire production is in the hands of these few people. Understood? Because these factory owners, they earned huge profits and they started establishing more and more factories. Now these very few people, few business people, they started controlling the entire production of that country. You can imagine all the products from that country is being generated from the factories of these people. That means they are the key people of production and they cornered fabulous wealth. So these few people, how what they became, they tried to control the lot of wealth and wielded immense power and prestige. As they accumulated more and more wealth, they turned into very powerful, prestigious people, these business people, and they are called capitalists. Capitalist means they are the people who invest capital. Capital means you can call it as money. So here, these capitalists who invest money and responsible for the control of the entire production in that country, they turn into more wealthy people and very powerful people. On the other hand, it created a class of workers living in poverty, depending entirely on the capitalist employers for bread. So, these capitalists, who are the major people in investing money and creating more number of factories, they became rich and wealthy in a very rapid and revolutionary manner. But unlike these factory owners, the workers did not revolutionarily become wealthy. They didn't become so wealthy as these people have become. Still, some of these working class people, they remained poor. Okay, when compared to these wealthy, rich capitalists, a group of people who are working in the factories, they remained still poor. They were completely dependent on these factory owners for their food and for their salaries. So on one hand, a group of people became so wealthy, and the other hand, a group of people still remained poor. That was one negative impact, which was the result of industrial revolution. And industrial capitalists monopolized political power. economic power was used to seize political power, which in turn brought further economic benefits. So now what happened was these industrial capitalists, that means people who are the factory owners, you can call it as the people who owns the factory. These capitalists, they monopolized political power. What do you mean by monopolizing? As they are more rich and wealthy, they control the politics of their nation because they, in fact, try to, control the rulers of that area through the money and other means. And because of the economic power they have, they could control the political power. So, as economically they are very rich, they could control the politics of the nation and they could also seize the political power. That means the politicians started listening to these big industrial people because all the money was with these industrial people. So they controlled the politics. And it in turn, when these business people started controlling politics, it even further gave more economic benefits to them. They made politicians to have more beneficial policies for these people, capitalist people, and they could economically become super rich in very less time. So in England, outwardly there was democracy, but actually aristocrats or oligarchs ruled. So England, as you know, it is a hometown of industrial revolution. I think the firstly, even this kind of industrial capitalism and all is also seen in those areas. Now, these industrial capitalists, even though England was a democratic nation, that means where people's majority will rule, even though the politicians who are representatives of people were ruling, it was this capitalist controlling these politicians. So outwardly there was democracy, that means people's governments. But indirectly, behind the scene, these aristocrats or oligarchs, that means these industrially rich class people, they were the masters behind the politics. It was, even though people's elected government and it was looking as if the England was following democracy, but the political governments formed through democracy were controlled by economically powerful capitalists. And parliament was controlled by rich landlords and big capitalists. That's what, no? Parliament, which is the house of democracy, all the politicians, they were listening to the rich, wealthy, and landlords, or you can call it oligarchs. Oligarchs are the people who are very rich, wealthy, industrially very wealthy and rich people, and they in turn control the politics here. That was another negative impact. So the other negative impacts of industrial revolution was the ruthless exploitation of workers took place in the factories. They were made to work for 12 to 15 hours at a stretch, and a number of women and children were employed in the factories because their labor was found cheaper than that of men. Conditions in the mines were still worse, where women and children had to drag carts like ponies. So here, another negative impact of industrial revolution was ruthless exploitation of workers. That means exploitation means misuse or using more than their requirement. What they would do, what was the first thing they used to do? The factory owners, even though they were paying salaries, these factory owners made laborers to work for 12 to 15 hours at a stretch. Imagine 12 to 15 hours the factory workers have to work. You may be thinking that they are giving employment, but they were over used. The laborers were used more than what they were being paid. That is called exploitation. So 12 to 15 hours of work is one negative impact, and more women and children were employed. So why more women and children were employed in factories? Because they found cheaper than that of men. That means compared to men, women and children were, were given very less number of wages. The women and children used to work for very less salaries, very less wages compared to men, because they feel that women and children are physically weak and the amount of work they do doesn't need for them to pay equally salaries like they pay to men. So one thing, the negative impact was exploiting in huge number of hours. Second thing was women and children were used extensively to save salaries and wages, and women and children also had to drag carts like the ponies. So ponies here means the horses, right? Horse carriages. You might have seen small horses carrying the carriages, the goods and other things. So inside the mines, okay, especially the mining areas and all, children and women, they were taken inside the mines, and all the mined material, what they used to do, they used to keep in a small cart and ask the children and women to drag inside from the mining areas. And the employment of women and children in factories and mines often meant that men had no employment. Sometimes all the workers were dismissed unjustly and arbitrarily. See, this kind of ruthless policy towards the laborers, that is, employing completely women and children, because for women and children they can pay very less salaries and more work they can extract from them. And sometimes men were completely not given any employment, they were completely neglected, and all the workers were dismissed unjustly and arbitrarily. So if they don't work and if they don't show them the more than what they require, then automatically what these people used to do, they used to remove them, saying on different reasons, unjust and unruly, reasons, what arbitrarily, that means without any, what do you call, without any mercy and all, they used to completely remove them. So authoritatively, they used to remove the workers. Whenever they don't have work, keep them aside. Whenever they have work, take them. This kind of policies were followed, which is a negative impact of industrial revolution. The workers lived in small tenements where there were no facilities for lighting, heating, sanitation, and hygiene. Bad food, poor clothing, slum dwelling, and miserable living conditions were there. So what happened? You look at the the workers, the factory workers, and how were their conditions. They were living in small tenements, that means a flat kind of area. You can imagine like flat or small area of living, and no lighting facilities were there, no sanitation and hygiene facilities were provided, drainages and all were never seen. They lay some temporary tents and other constructive buildings kind of things, and they have to live there. No sanitation facility or water facility, never they provide. Very bad food is provided to the workers. They had a very poor clothing, and slum dwelling. Slum dwelling means around these factory areas, due to improper planning and due to improper sanitation facilities, people started living in crowded atmosphere, crowded areas, and it became very unhealthy atmosphere for people to live there, and the conditions of living was miserable, very very bad. They were not worried about the food, the bad food they were taking. Even though the factories used to make them work for hours together, they were not bothered about whether they're having healthy food or not. So that kind of, you can see here the amount of around these factories, how the houses were there. The streets were very crowded here, and in these small houses they used to live. No sanitation is covered. You can see children who went into a mining factory, how they look. They were used to clean the machines and all. The children especially, they have the small hands, so they can easily make their hands used for the cleaning of the machines in the factories and all. Such many things as dangerous things were also even done with the children and women. So when such situations were prevailing with the workers, when such all situations were faced by workers, they also had fevers, and plague created havoc among the working class. So automatically, when hygienic conditions and very poor working conditions are present, what will happen? Very bad food is given to workers. obviously it results in ill health of people, right? The working class, that is the labor class. They very frequently used to fall ill, and plague, which is a very dangerous disease of those days, infectious disease, got spread and it killed many people. The Industrial Revolution made the Western nations rich and powerful, and they followed a policy of colonialism, imperialism, and exploitation. So, very important outcome of this Industrial Revolution. Another negative impact was the nations became rich. The Western countries like England, France, Germany, they became very rich and powerful, right? When they became rich and powerful, what they started doing? They adapted the policy of colonialism. That means going and occupying and turning other places as their colonies. Imperialism, that means having a mindset to control all other countries or all other nations' resources. And exploitation, once they make a country or a place as their colony through imperialism, that is the attitude of controlling the other places, they started exploiting the resources of those countries. For example, you take India. India was a colony, right? India was a colony of British, because Britishers were having imperialistic nature. That means they were having a tendency to control other places. They want other places to be controlled because they are rich and powerful. And because of this imperialistic and colonialistic nature, they started exploiting their colonies. They needed cheap raw materials for feeding their machines and worldwide market for their manufactured goods. So here you have to remember 2 points. One is they need cheap raw materials. That means raw material is used for making a product. Now, these raw materials, they want it at a cheaper price so that they can earn huge profits. So where can they find these cheap raw materials? In the colonies they occupied. So if they occupied particular area, suppose this is England and it has occupied India. Now all raw materials are taken from India to England. So the industries in England were supplied with raw materials from India to England. So once these raw materials are supplied to England, they manufacture goods and they get back and sell again their manufactured goods in India. So why they want all these things? They want cheap raw materials on one hand, and they want a worldwide market for their manufactured goods. Whatever goods they manufacture here, that is sent to the colonies for sale. Their products are again sold here. And the colonies and empires were needed for economic gain. Highly industrialized Western nations conquered the economically backward countries of Asia and Africa, exploited their resources. So what they did, they went and occupied through war or many other ways. As they're rich and powerful, they went around the world and they occupied certain places and they called it as their colonies. And economically, by this time, there were some countries of Asia and Africa were very poor. So they went to Asian and African countries and they exploited the resources of those nations. India, China, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Egypt, Congo, and many other countries became the victims of Western capitalism and imperialism. So, with the money they have, the industrial nations sponsored the kings, sponsored their governments, and these governments, in turn, they went out and they captured many colonies in Asia and Africa. And the colonies in Asia and Africa, like India, okay, Myanmar, Egypt in Africa, Congo in Africa, they all became centers of resources, exploitation of resources. So England, especially, it tried to take out resources from all these Egypt, India, and they made their industries more wealthy. So the reasons were Western capitalism and imperialism. Capitalism means accumulation of wealth in group of people, and these group of people in turn what they did, they tried to control the politics of their areas. When they tried to control the politics of their area, then they wanted those their rulers or their governments to go and occupy other countries for resources. So that is capitalistic nature, and imperialistic means the tendency to control other areas for resources. This was also another very evil impact of the Industrial Revolution throughout the world.